Good morning, and thank you for joining this month's Worksoft webinar. We're going to get started now. This month's webinar is Streamline Success and Master Process Efficiency with Next-Gen Automation. I'm Austin Chandler, Senior Content Manager at Worksoft, and your host for today's webinar. Today's presentation will be recorded, and a link to the on-demand session will be available for those who are unable to attend or those who just wish to share and review the information. Due to a large number of participants, lines will be muted. We'll answer some questions at the end of our presentation. If we have time, please use the questions feature to submit a question. If we don't get to your question due to time constraints, we'll send you a reply via email. Today, Worksoft Director of Product Development, Anand Kameshwaran, will explore tools like process intelligence and test automation and how they empower teams to streamline their complex business processes, embrace agile innovation, and drive collaboration to break down silos between business and IT. Without further ado, I'll turn things over to AK.
Thank you, Austin. All right, so let's go ahead and kick this off. So today, really what we kind of want to focus on is, how do we actually look at overall processes and automate and manage those effectively across the organization, regardless of where they start from, right? And so you may notice I don't start talking about tests. I don't talk about RPA. I'm really talking about our overall business processes and looking at it from that larger context, as that will deliver benefits throughout the entire life cycle. Then we're going to talk about how we can incorporate the views on these processes and bring our processes into our agile frameworks, whether we're talking about from a test or QA perspective, as well as in production. And finally, the last part really, of being successful is not just, around the technology and ensuring that our processes are successful, running successfully, and that we can define those, the characteristics and have that confidence, but we also need to be able to work across silos and across organizations in order to deliver those results. So I want to talk a little bit also about how the Worksoft platform not only helps address and streamline the technology, but also enables these other teams to work together effectively and efficiently from the same base. We'll finish up with some wrap up and some Q&A, and let's kind of take it from there. So, why are we doing this? And I think right now, particularly as we look at macroeconomic conditions and other situations that are happening within business today, the lack of availability of trained and skilled resources in the market. So whenever we start to see those trends for business, automation starts to become a much more important part of both the short-term tactics as well as the longer-term strategy, right? So as you would expect right now, being able to automate processes and drive efficiencies across the business is a huge topic, for most of our customers and your peers. And not only are they piloting and prototyping for automation, they're also setting targets and goals, right? These are real things that we want to accomplish. And most enterprises know it takes some time, so they're piloting now and setting goals for having these technologies adopted in just the next year and rolled out and ready to go. So, Worksoft has been in the industry serving very large package applications for well over 20 years. We have a pretty strong background for many years in the testing space. In the past 5 to 6 years, though, we have taken that strength and the successful implementations that we have sort of in testing and really have been looking at the entire process, the entire business process. So along, to that end, we have introduced capabilities around process intelligence as well as production automation, either just in terms of automating the tests and the automation we have today, as well as robotic process automation. We really came to this space based upon what we had done with our customers very successfully for 15 plus years. Our lead customers were sort of leading the charge in terms of taking process automation and out of a test and QA focus and moving it across the board. And so we listened and went with with the leading edge, and have started building out these other capabilities so that we can really look at processes as a whole instead of the individual silos that we have today, right? So let's talk a little bit about what are kind of the sort of challenges, right? So if we go back a few years, everybody kind of looked at things from their own lens. So you would have business owners or process analysts and other things, right? So they look at the overall business process, and they're not necessarily concerned with the implementation, testing, or others. They're just like, hey, I need to place a sales order, and so that team works kind of independently. In terms of how do we do that, whether it's driven by humans or automated, they go, hey, this is the business function we need. How do we do that? Then IT teams, right? They get tasked with, hey, we need systems that can actually go ahead and do this. So that same process gets looked at almost independently, from an IT perspective. Okay, so how do we build out this process, implement it, test it, so that the business can overall have it. But again, these would happen sort of in silos. Everybody was just kind of looking at their one piece of the elephant, right? And then you would again have business owners, from the next perspective, really looking at the operational and the cost efficiencies, from a finance standpoint, right? So how do we understand the risks that are associated with our process? How do we know what are, the inefficiencies that are best to be targeted? And historically, each group would take a look from their own focus, choose their own set of tooling, and ultimately what we lead to is doing the same work 3 times from 3 different lenses, and it's incredibly slow. Not to mention we have to move this data across multiple tools, multiple reporting methodologies, things like that. So this is kind of where we get to where we need to be in the modern era and moving forward, right? We can no longer effectively look at these processes really just from one stakeholder's point of view. And so we, with our connective automation platform, we're kind of bringing those different views, whether it's from, I'm focused on, what does this process look like? What is it doing? What does it accomplish from the business, really from a, BPL, BPMN type of perspective? We bring that together with the test and QA folks and the development folks who have integrated this as part of their software development lifecycle. Again, their focus is on what are the bits and the bytes that I need? How do I know that this transaction was programmatically successful? So we tie these pieces together, within the one platform, and then from there we take those same artifacts because it's all in one platform, and we can quickly turn that into automation for production as well. So as opposed to having 3 different groups all going off working on their own tasks for something that is essentially one business function, right? It's defining what's the function that we need, what do we need to develop, and how do we understand its impact in production. We can now take that one logical business process and through the platform provide the appropriate view and the appropriate data to each of those stakeholders in the way they expect to consume it, right? So when all of these groups are working together, it becomes very, very easy to streamline your overall business processes, right? So if we take another look more in terms of what folks are going to be doing to kind of get there within the platform, right? If you want to ultimately streamline your processes, it's a very, there's kind of 3 very simple steps. First is you just capture what the end users do, and within our platform, we have a component that we call, surprisingly, business capture, and that just simply sits and watches what your business users do today. So if we talk about that creating a sales order or a fulfillment type of process, our business users just capture what they do today, and we just kind of pull that in the background. They don't need to learn anything new or understand the rest of the tech, and now we have an idea of how that process is supposed to flow. So from there, we can basically take those captures and easily automate the process from there, right? So we can just record what the user does. Now we know how to play it back, as well as parameterize it and make some changes to handle variations. And now we go ahead and run that in production, run those tests and validate that everything works well. We can also integrate those tests into our CI/CD pipeline, and I'll talk a little bit more along those lines. So we now have automated regressions for every future cycle. And again, this is at one level, not new stuff. We've all been doing these sort of things for quite a while. We capture what our end users do. Then we test it, run it into production. But the key difference here is this is all within one tool, and rather than maybe using like an Adobe Captivate and let's see, capture documentation for everything our users do. Now IT folks pick it up and they try to talk with your end users to figure out what does this mean technically. This is all now as part of a single artifact that we pass along to help drive the collaboration there. And then at that point, when we are ready to go into production, we can take those same artifacts and just go ahead and automatically run that in production when we need to. When we take processes into production, oftentimes there is a need for additional governance and audit. So when we get to that third step, we kind of have you covered either way, right? If we just need to run some internal processes, we can quickly and easily push those to production straight from our existing system. If we are talking about regulated and governed processes, we also provide an entire governance model for that promotion into production for the processes that we have captured and developed. And so we can, again, just very quickly move from the test environment straight into production and provide the governance and the audit capabilities that are oftentimes needed. All right, so one of the perennial challenges around automation and things like that is things are constantly changing, and we and we want to minimize as many human steps as possible. And so over the past, starting in the late 2000s, folks started developing a method called Agile that allows us to rapidly iterate over as we make improvements. And it allows us to very quickly incorporate those improvements and kind of get them out the door. So we kind of build out, our definitions and other things over on this left-hand side. We then hand them on over to test. We hand them on over into, once we've tested everything, we pop it into production, and we think about that agile life cycle as just a continuous loop, right? But the reality here is that rarely do we actually follow all of this when we're talking about full end-to-end business processes. This kind of flow makes a lot of sense when we're talking about new custom development, right? You have to have developed it and designed it to begin with before you can go through all of this flow. But when we're talking about end-to-end business processes that can be made up of custom development as well as packaged applications, custom little utilities that we've built, from an RPA or other perspective to glue those things together, that has traditionally been a challenge to kind of bring into the Agile environment. There's, even though Agile is designed to handle change, we're not always starting from a design standpoint, right? A package application, you don't just have open design, you're almost oftentimes starting from a test perspective. So within the Worksoft platform, we enable our users to both shift left as well as we like to say, shift right. So, if we think about shift left, it's generally that idea that the earlier we can detect challenges, the earlier we find bugs and identify problems in our software development lifecycle, the less cost and the easier and cheaper it will be to remediate, and the more that we can address risk. One of the things I think is really cool that we are able to do here, based upon our integrated platform, is not only can we shift left sort of that risk detection or others, but if we take the example of a packaged application where we have some existing tests, we can actually back that up to the original discovery, right? So when you're doing new development, it's always going to start from some engineer kind of doing that development. When you're working a packaged app in, usually that initial design was done by the provider and the vendor. So we can take those tests and really use those to shift left those artifacts and use those to create the documentation and others. So the power of this platform means even if you're not starting in the simple normal order, that we think and tend to talk about for the typical brownfield, or where most of us find ourselves, we have things that were already done in step 2 that we need to backport to step 1, and we give you a very easy way, regardless of where you're at, to take whatever investment you currently have. So if you've got a good investment in that documentation, we can quickly push that forward into test and production. if at the moment, hey, we've got a lot of good tests and we really need to help document, we can push those pieces back left and use those to drive both the collaboration and greater efficiencies. And then the last piece is kind of the shift right, which is once we have all of these, we understand what the business process is, it's documented and it's tested, we no longer need to go now to a new solution or work in a different platform to automate those same functions in production, but we can just go ahead and shift right that same artifact that we have already tested and move it forward, to execute that process in production, gain those insights, and feed it back for the next iteration. Now, one of the, again, these are sort of the high level how we want to talk, how we talk to doing CI/CD, how we do our, actually deliver our products. And at one level, it sounds really simple, but there is generally one, just major challenge to long-term ROI when you do this kind of investment, right? Which is every time you're having a new iteration, things change. And when you do automation, right, automation can be very susceptible to change, sometimes becomes fragile. This is why we tend to see in the industry that automation projects oftentimes take longer and don't get to the results that were expected as quickly as possible. And it's this unaccounted for change and the challenges around handling it that drive a lot of it. So we have been doing this for quite a while. And so even when we were doing this in the test scenario, and not even in the larger context that I'm talking about here, we were trying to address, a lot of those challenges from a change standpoint, particularly when we talk about automating regressions, right? So we have done some other webinars, and this is a patented technology that we have called the Object Action Framework, right? So what does the Object Action Framework do, right? So if we talk about, we go from iteration 1 to iteration 2 when we're updating an application, and perhaps it's something like SAP has just changed the look and feel of a drop-down menu, or we've made some minor tweak one way or the other. Now, from a simple unit test or other idea along those lines, that same dropdown, that same piece is likely a part of multiple tests, right? Maybe it's the login page, actually had a presentation layer change or a little bit of change in that flow. And this, again, now creates a problem when we're trying to do the automatic regression. Somebody might have to go in, and even though logically the overall step and everything is the same, we still need to go in, make a tweak to the test that then spirals out into changes we need to make to production, and ultimately creates a lot of headwinds around automating these overall processes, particularly when we think both about a development context as well as the production. So our object framework really takes all of those individual little pieces and it turns it into an object that we can understand. So when we have captured what the business user does in the background, we create a set of abstract objects, sort of in the abstract, and we try to understand the goal. So when there is a change, right, we can the first time that we encounter that change, we detect, okay, hey, there's a small change, and one, it may be just a presentation layer type of thing. And so if we can automatically determine that that is appropriate, we just go ahead and move on, and we don't worry about that change, and our test succeeds. In the other scenario, though, hey, maybe there is something, that we do need to tweak because of this change. And so within the object action framework, in the event that one of these smaller changes at the presentation layer or logic changes actually does need to be updated, we ask the user just once, they record the new path that they are doing, and then any place else that uses that same kind of control, that same kind of flow, we can automatically and update those changes kind of across the board. So when we do encounter that change as a part of our continuous CI/CD pipeline, rather than a small change suddenly spiraling out and impacting multiple artifacts that we need to update, we can quickly and easily detect that, fix it, and keep it going, and basically just keep the pipeline running without having to basically detect the problem and then find it again everywhere and fix it everywhere. The object action framework is going to let us find it, attempt to auto resolve it, and ask the user when we can't. And at the end of the day, we will basically be able to identify the problem once and fix it wherever it occurs in your end-to-end processes, right? This is one of those things that if you look at a lot of your at functional or unit testing type of tools, because they tend to be focused on the individual step, you have those challenges to update. That leads to this kind of detect once and then fix everywhere type of scenario. One of the powers of our platform is we are taking that larger view, right? All of the little tests, those individual activities become part of a larger process, and those become part of that larger end-to-end flow. And because we understand that context, we can evaluate it from there and make those fixes, automatically in the background, and ultimately support and not lead to any slowdown, and minimize the number of manual interventions needed in your CI/CD pipeline, right? If a good CI/CD pipeline never really needs a manual intervention of any sort, that is, of course, not the reality. There's always, little things at the edge that we need to handle. But the more that we can minimize those, the better we'll get to a longer term ROI and have a lot better success. The other thing that I like, and we started talking about this a couple of years ago as we started releasing our formal governed production process automation capabilities, which is normally in a CI/CD pipeline, you rarely see people talk about run or really talk about it, right? Because CI/CD really had a very development focus when it was originally developed and wasn't always thinking from the business perspective. So usually, I was used to, and even when I would talk about this earlier, it's like, oh, run. We just run it in production and we pull back some insights. Here now, the actual production runs can be a part of your full-on CI/CD pipeline. So we take the same artifacts we tested. We know that it's solid, so we can automate that production into, or automate that promotion into production. Hang the governance that we need in there for those processes that would be that are audited or have regulatory concerns. But at this point, these, the run actually becomes a full-fledged member of the CI/CD pipeline. And because we're using the same underlying engine to both capture what the end users did, to run the tests, and to run the production version of those artifacts, they really do provide direct insights back. Again, if we think about some of the disparate tools that we might have, there's usually some poor soul who is left going, okay, our production tool has this view and on these overall processes, so let me try to marry this data together so I can tie together what we saw from our orchestration tool back to our test tool, make sure we're talking about the same process and try to deliver those insights. By putting it all into one platform, all of these associations are already there. And so those production insights are not a task left for you to gather. It's instead done for you by the platform itself. And we just need the right folks to review that information and just go about making decisions based upon that data instead of spending your time gathering that data. And I think that leads us to, sort of where I wanted to talk about the enhanced collaboration, right? And in terms of, I've been fairly process heavy. I keep saying, hey, there's the disparate teams, but talking about how the technology kind of solves that. But at the end of the day, the success is also based upon everybody in the organization knowing what everybody is doing. The ability to share the insights that have been gained is how we make those right decisions moving forward. So, not only have we brought together the kind of technical aspects and what it is that we're going to execute, we're also creating the sort of different workflows that allow the different responsible stakeholders to see the information that they want to see at a glance, and get their own sort of window into that data, to give them the information that's more relevant for them. So, at one level, we can think about really from the top end, just understanding what our processes do. So as we capture what the end users are doing, we also have integrations for process mining tools. We can pull in, all of the information we have on both what has happened in the past as well as what we're doing now, and kind of give this sort of business and process focused view, right? So we can understand what are all the steps that make up our end-to-end processes. We can understand the amount of variation or change that might be driving maybe slower results or other things, compared to what would be the desires of the business. But this really helps, really from the folks who are really very business focused. What does the process do? What is my ROI on it? To them, whatever the technology in the background is a bit of a black box. But they're able to pull in this data based upon what the technologists are doing rather than sort of an external tool that just kind of looks at it in the aggregate. And so for those users, we provide that exact view. The nice thing is when they find a process that they, that needs some work, right? They can directly from this interface, just go ahead and kick that off for the testers and other things, and kind of kick it right into the kind of traditional CI/CD pipeline, right? So from a collaboration standpoint, our business user who needs to provide, what are the requirements? Take a look from their view, understand what it is that they need, and right in their own view, they mark it, and this now can enter into our overarching CI/CD pipeline, and that view chosen, at the front end becomes one of the kind of that first artifact that we can start shifting right. So we kind of take that internal collaboration and just make that a regular workflow in the tool. So business user or the analyst, they figure out what we need to do. They mark it right within our tool. The automation engineers who now need to make sure, what was there, something that we can automate, take account of some of those variations, all within that same tool. They come in and they go into our Certify Automation Studio and they make their tweaks from those definitions. And they use that to create both the functional and the end-to-end integration tests, at that point. Again, this is starting from that same kind of capture artifact. So now, in the old days, once we had all that tested, some production IT group that's all concerned about, the production IT would go in and talk to the business users and maybe some of the people in test and QA to figure out, okay, what's this process that we need to build, right? So they start building their own production automation, and it's a disconnected piece, and oftentimes there's drift. If I went back a few years ago, we see a lot of times what we implemented in production is not quite the same process that we had tested. Here, that doesn't happen. We just shift right the automation that we already have from that functional or integration standpoint. We add the governance to it, and now we shift that forward. And there is now a UI and another window on this that your production automation folks, who are typically more aligned with the business, they can come in and see the results of their business processes, get the notification of exceptions that they need if there's something that will then require manual intervention in production because we've hit an unintended or unexpected area. And they'll also be able to pull the audit information and that may be needed for those production processes, right? If you're doing credit card transactions through these things and you need to fulfill PCI DSS reports and things like that, once they flip that artifact over, we also take care of all of that audit, right? So in the absence of this kind of platform, most of these things are handled by people endlessly passing spreadsheets and emails and kind of one-offs, and we call meetings to figure out, hey, what do these things mean? Are we actually aligned? Once we pull those into that single platform, we don't have to worry about missing that alignment. It makes the collaboration much easier. We're all looking at the same thing, but we do provide the view that provides the relevant information for each of those different lenses and those different places from where we were looking before. Particularly when we start looking at the power of this kind of methodology, right? Where I like to look at this is really in terms of our at the end of the day ROI, right? So usually when we're building out these processes, particularly when we talk about an end-to-end business process, the end goal is to actually do some business, right? Whether it's place an order, fulfill an order. And when you have these larger disparate systems, if we think about that life cycle and we want to take our order system, first we design it. And these are very sequential types of operations, even sort of in the Agile universe, when you don't have a unified tool that helps drive that collaboration. So we define it. Now we set up a bunch of tests and we confirm that the system is actually working. And normally it's not until that step is complete that we can begin the testing and the execution for the production version. So ultimately, what it leads to is even in the prettiest scenario, you've got a delay between when the process is done and tested before you can actually start to get value out of it in production. When these are the same artifacts, right, all the way from capture to test to that production automation, you can really get to the point that once you have completed that test cycle of those development artifacts, you can start to promote those into production just a day or two later, because we're not testing something new. We're testing something that we have already built. It is not a different version of it. It's already all in alignment. Not only that, but we have avoided any of the delays of communication. We don't need development and QA to say, hey, we're done, now you guys can pick it up and run with it. Instead, everybody has been informed every step along the way. And that feedback is, again, always going against that same piece in the same platform. So we don't have these input resistances or these kind of artificial calendar time things kind of being injected. So when we go, if we want to talk about how do we get to a really quick ROI, well, one is how do we shorten that time between we define what we want and we are able to build those tests, and we're able to do that in the one platform and eliminate that time. We want to get to that kind of day one value. Where's another big lag is usually that handoff as we get from we've got our tested out processes and others, we're ready to now do our production deployment. How do we move that automation over? And again, now we can make those one artifact that is shared, simplify those kind of resistance points for the overall flow, and we're ready to go. Now, I'll also say this is aspirational. When we talk about an enterprise and the number of constraints, whether it be security, regulation, and others, one day isn't going to happen. And that's just because of humans, regulation, and other things. But the platform is going to be capable of doing that. So we are seeing that the time frame for getting out to production is being cut down to, say, just a couple of weeks for processes compared to a couple month kind of time frames that we saw in the past. So I will say day one is absolutely possible, but most of the time these are fairly large and complex processes. But I really would love it when the technology is faster. The technology should not be the slowest chain in the or the slow chain, right? It has to be our processes and regulation, and this puts us in the place where the technology is not going to create any of those delays, and it can move just as fast as our organization can. And if you're worried about how fast your organization can move, hopefully I've shown you along here the ways that we can help speed up those sort of input and resistance points. All right, so I'm gonna want to leave you with a couple closing thoughts before opening it up for kind of open questions and things like that. So one piece I just want to share, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time digging into it, but it's one thing for me to sit here and tell you, hey, we've been doing this for 20 years, and other things, but we have some pretty large customers that have been doing it and have been showing success for a very long time, right? So we will see really whether we're either talking about packaged applications, and particularly SAP. We have a very good strong expertise in building out the tests and other pieces along those lines. We have customers who go ahead and do kind of the whole platform, right? Everything from capture through to production. And some of them focus on the areas where they have the greatest lift or some of the bigger challenges, right? So the platform does cover all areas, but you can kind of use it for the pieces that you need and kind of focus there, right? So if your bigger challenge is really how do I get my production into my overall agile pipeline and drive some efficiencies there, we've been having lots of good success along those lines. Right, so just some final thoughts I kind of want to leave you with, right? I've been in the space for a good long time. I really came more from a development background, but just going back to some of the changing macroeconomic conditions that we find ourselves in, as well as the changes in security expectations and policy. We cannot, as an industry, we can't continue to kind of operate in these overall silos. Automation is changing. We'll talk about this later, in some following up webinars, but not only are the expectations changing, both in terms of, how fast the businesses want us to react. The regulatory environments are becoming more extreme and more concerned with what we do in development and QA, particularly if we look to Europe. But with globally, dev and QA can't be the Wild West anymore. And not to mention the impact that generative AI is starting to bring to automation as well. So digital automation is changing. What we've been doing for years is not going to work going forward. We really need to break down the silos, bring together the disparate tooling, not only to drive efficiencies during some uncertain economic times, but also to prepare ourselves to take advantage of the next layer of capabilities. If you are thinking about how do we take advantage of generative AI or some of these new types of technologies to help us with streamlining our processes or provide better customer service, it's one thing to put those capabilities on top of a single data set and on top of a single platform so that it can learn and interact in that context. And that's challenging enough. But if we want to try to teach a generative AI how to go across our own human silos, as we're ready to take advantage of that, that's going to be a much heavier lift. So, there are both some very short-term, very important, sort of economic conditions that drive both the need to automate more than ever and are changing the way that we do it. As opportunities open up and as we want to use these challenges as an opportunity to drive our business forward and to capture more revenue, because for me, there's always that's the fun. When the macroeconomic conditions are challenging, this is when you can really grow your portfolio and by providing good solutions. So we need to change what we do today, not only to drive efficiencies to handle the short term, but so that we're also prepared to grow as we head into 2024 and to take advantage of new technologies as they become available. So I want to thank you all for listening to me. I think I can open it up for questions at this time.
Thanks, AK. I think we're good on questions this time, so we can wrap up a little bit early and give everyone a little more time back. So yeah, thanks, AK. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning for this webinar. Hope you gained some insight into how teams engage test automation and transform and optimize for ongoing change, like AK said. Link to the recording will be sent within the next business day, and have a great day, and we'll see you next time.